Welcome, Joan,
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
and great to have you here. So we have got a lot to discuss. I mean, you've got a very interesting career. You're doing some pretty interesting things, which I think is very creative. I like the direction you're going. I'll give you my thoughts on it, and we can take it from there. But maybe a good place to start is your very interesting career, because I think people know you for the work you're doing now, but you were a consultant previously. Maybe let's start there.
Well, and even before consulting,
Yeah.
I started out in life to be a university professor, which I was for what for some people would be a full career.
And was that a university professor in business?
No, not at all.
No.
No, it was I taught literature and film.
Wow.
So my first graduate set of graduate degrees was in English.
Yeah.
So how do you make the transition then from teaching English to undergraduates, teaching Shakespeare and etc., to becoming a consultant, a strategy consultant, and ultimately a partner at Bain Company? You know, what happened was the academy in the years that I entered it was feeling its first real throes of too many professors, not enough
Yes.
jobs. So
So this was a problem for a long time. It's not just recent.
yeah. Well, it started back then. This was actually in the 70s, early 70s,
Wow.
which was when the PhD glut really hit the market. So I had my first experience of a very badly managed industry and a really badly managed industry structure. But my husband, who and I, we met in graduate school. We were very lucky that we both had full-time real academic jobs in the same city.
Yes.
But we really did not like it there.
Oh.
And we thought we didn't really want to spend the rest of our lives there. So we began, casting about for something else to do. And I happened to read, because at this time I had gotten tenure and I was the chair of a very small department, but somebody gave me a big Peter Drucker book to read about management. And I was so blown away by it that I, looked at the book jacket, the flap, to say, what does this guy do for a living? Because these are really interesting problems that he tackles. And it said he was a management consultant. And to be honest with you, I had no idea what a management consultant was. So I began a process of, calling everybody I could think of. Does anybody know a management consultant? What they actually do? What do you have to do to become one, et cetera, et cetera. So I ended up leaving teaching and going back to school for yet another degree. I went to business school.
So you did an MBA?
MBA at Harvard.
Wow, back to school.
Back to school, and ultimately, when I got there, I was quite surprised to learn that consulting was really a hot profession. It was, and it was actually a very well-paid profession. Which, contrary to my first choice, being an English teacher, was stunning. But it's not why I chose it. Just because I thought it was really fascinating, intellectually challenging, practical, and as I say, thanks to Peter Drucker, who I ultimately did get to meet and
visit. Great.
Yeah. So
but before you continue, I just want to step back for a second, and I want you to elaborate on a point. So you were a tenured professor at university, right?
Yes.
So you have a lifetime career here.
Yes.
And you then discussed with your husband that you want to leave lifetime employment to go back to be a student. It's probably going to cost you a bit, also lost income.
Yes.
Restart. I mean, how did he take this?
He was in a similar position. We knew that we didn't want the life that we had.
Yes.
And tenure is a very curious thing. Most people, you grasp and you fight and you claw your way to get it, and then you're set for the rest of your life. I had the opposite reaction to it. I looked around and I said, "Oh my God, this is the rest of my life."
Yeah.
And I just knew that that was not it. That was not going to happen. So we we had invested a lot in that first career, but heck, which we were ready to start over, which we did. So I went to business school. My husband, who was his field was linguistics, taught himself to be a software developer.
Wow, he also made a change.
Oh, absolutely. We in order to live where we wanted to live, we both needed to say, well, what else do we want to do for a living? So that was that was how I got to business school. And then from business school, how I got to Bain was kind of funny because at the beginning of the school year, I met a student who was a year ahead.
Yeah.
And I told her that and she had gone into consulting and was doing very well. And she said, well, if you want to go into consulting, she said, Bain loves ed reps. I don't know if you know what an ed rep is.
No, what is an ed rep? Enlighten me.
It's at every section, which is the groupings of 80 students in it, that you stick with here. They elect a few class officers. One of them is the ed rep, and the ed rep's job is to be kind of, I thought of as being like the shop foreman in the section, the students in the section, and the professors. And I really had no interest in running for any elective office whatsoever, but I really had a strong interest and a motivation to be successful at my career change. So I put myself up to become the ed rep, and I was actually kind of a logical choice because I had, almost a decade's worth of professoring, and I was older and more experienced than a lot of the professors that we had in the section. So it was interesting, and frankly, that is why I got hired at Bain. I'm convinced to this day.
Yeah. So it came up during your interviews.
No, they're more subtle. It just showed up on my resume. Yeah. But I think that I actually think it was kind of smart at the time. I don't know if this is still true at Bain, but it's a good training for consulting. You have to listen to listen to people and solve people's problems and do it diplomatically. And so that was how I got to Bain. Otherwise, I don't think with my resume I would have been a big draw.
You never know, Joan. You were quite accomplished at a young age.
So anyway, that's how I got to Bain.
So when you got to Bain, were you interviewed by now Senator Romney?
Absolutely. Mitt Romney was the head of recruiting the year that I was hired, and then I actually worked with him when I joined the firm. We did some early work in healthcare, which I think laid the grounds for what we call Romney Care here in Massachusetts, where I live. But that was quite an experience. He's a formidable guy.
So I didn't know that. So I knew he was a formidable guy. I mean, everyone you speak to only has good things to say about him. But I didn't know that he had been consulting, or Bain had been consulting on healthcare work in Massachusetts, which then sort of laid some of the thinking behind what became.
Well,
healthcare.
It was actually, I don't want to make a direct link between that and Romney Care. It's more expertise in healthcare.
Ah, yes.
It was interesting. This was in the early 80s. Yeah. And at the time, everybody was saying that competition was going to come to healthcare finally. Mm-hmm. And so we were prepared, and we had a couple of major clients, hospital supply company, pharmaceutical company, whatever. So we were working with a number of clients in the healthcare field. And so we both learned a lot, and not both, but many of us at Bain learned a lot. We had a very thriving healthcare practice to prepare clients for competition, but the competition didn't exactly come the way we and the world were it to come.
So that's interesting. So you were one of the early female partners at Bain, I'm guessing.
Yes, I'm certainly not the first, but I was part of a very interesting generation of women who became partners. Yes. So I think when we got there was Erika Deesh, who was I think she was a partner when we arrived. If not, she was a manager, soon to become a partner. But there were a half a dozen of us, I'd say. Quite a remarkable group of women. Yes. And we still keep in touch all these years.
Wow, that's amazing.
Decades later. Yeah, we had a kind of reunion of sorts in 2017 at the Women's March. All the women who are still here from Boston, we got together and participated.
That says a lot about Bain's culture, that wherever you go, you remember the firm and good memories. You remember the people.
Yes, absolutely. It was I can't speak for the firm today, but it has been a truly extraordinary place with some remarkable women, and say among several of my very closest friends now for 30 years.
Yeah, that's one thing that I do think is unique about Bain, because I do know people at Bain now and many years ago, not as many as you obviously, but they are very proud of their culture. Not in a bad way, you feel that there's a connection that other firms don't necessarily foster.
Yes.
It's very unique. I think it's a good thing. I mean, it's obviously driven by some of the early partners who laid that culture, Mitt Romney being one of them. But you see it in every person who works at Bain. I think it's quite remarkable.
Yes, yeah. It was true, certainly when I was at Harvard and people were choosing ones who were going into consulting and who had offers, which one do you go to? And it was striking the different types, I would say. Certain type who chose McKinsey, certain type
that's true.
And a very different type who chose Bain. And I'm sure that's persisted to some degree because it's still a very strong culture, I think.
So you were a tenured professor. I'm sure one of the earliest tenured professors were female, right?
Well,
I mean, I'm looking at some of the numbers because I did some research before the call in terms of the number of female tenured professors in the 70s. And then you were a trailblazer, then you went to Bain, became a partner. And I mean, you were one of the older Bain consultants, I'm guessing, when you joined.
Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. I was definitely one of the older members of my business school class.
Yeah.
And that's true. That's true. And it was, one of those things when I started at Bain, I said, well, this is not an old person's game.
Yeah.
But it was for me at that time in my life, it was perfect. And my husband and I had a very simple plan when we left teaching, which was, we were leaving a kind of very low paid profession and moving both of us into a much more highly remunerated profession. And we said, well, we'll retire early and then we'll do this we planned to do when we were going to be teachers. So we are very passionate about travel. We've kind of spent lots of time all over the world and enjoy that a lot.
So when you joined Bain or when you were a professor, did you have kids, your husband and yourself?
No, didn't have kids. That was another choice we made kind of early on.
So it worked out for you guys. You kind of had a plan, a simple plan, which is always the best plan.
Well, everybody has to have a plan that works for them, and this one certainly worked for us. So we were able to retire very early and pursue a kind of the life we wanted to pursue.
Although retirement means something different for you, Joan, because you seem quite busy.
Yes. So I've retired a couple of times, actually. Yeah. But I thought my full retirement was when I left Bain, which was, let's say, in the around 1993, I think it was.
So from Bain, you went to Harvard Business Review?
Yeah, well, that's what. So I thought I was retiring when I left Bain because we hit our numbers and we said, that's it. We don't have to work anymore.
That's good.
So and I had a very good friend, very close friend who was connected with Harvard Business Review, and I was a friend of mine from business school, a classmate of mine. And she said, well, you can't just retire, and you have a unique skill because you are literate. You taught literature and writing and whatever, but you actually know a lot about business now. And I need you to meet the editor of Harvard Business Review. Surely you will find something you can do to. So that's what happened. I mean, basically, I ended up with what I think was the ideal. I don't know what to call it. It was not a job. I said I will never work for anybody again. So I was an early gig economy, I guess. But
yes, you were a pioneer again, Joan. I'm just hearing pioneering stories. Yeah.
I said I'm happy to work on a kind of freelance basis on individual articles and things, and as long as I can still tell you I'm going to go away for 3 months because we're going to Africa or Antarctica or we're going. So that was the deal that I struck, and it was terrific, and that was how I met Michael Porter. It was really unusual because the Harvard Business Review has wonderful editors, but very few of them actually have a business background.
That's right.
They tend to be journalists, writers, wonderful editors, smart people. But I had something a little bit different, which was I'd actually, spent a decade working inside the beast.
Yes.
And I knew what at a very practical level, what executives needed to hear what would help them most. And that I did want to say one more very good thing about Bain. I think of the many things I learned at Bain, one was a real respect for the general manager's job and how hard it is.
Yes.
And so I think that was something I could bring to the Business Review, and it was a good fit.
So when you were at Harvard Business Review, you were part of the editorial team, editing documents, and part of that crew, and that's how you met Michael Porter, editing some of his articles?
Yeah, essentially because I came from Bain, I was given the strategy beat.
Okay, got it. That makes sense.
So basically, if you look at all the strategy articles you could think of from the mid 90s to 2000, that they probably were me.
But that's quite an influential role. I mean, people don't understand the role of an editor. I mean, in a manner of speaking, you've shaped a lot of thinking in strategy.
I had not reflected on that.
But that's true, right? Because you serve as the same role as the editor at the New York Times would play.
Yeah, that's interesting. An interesting observation. I think there's some truth to that. We did end up putting out a book. It was, this was in the 90s.
Yeah.
It was called Managing in the New Economy. And all of the articles in the book were things that I had a substantial role in, creating with the authors. So it was a wonderful experience. One to work with these, great people was good.
Well, that's amazing. Good. So editor, and then you left the Harvard Business Review to work with Michael Porter.
Well, no, I left to retire again.
Retiring, yes. You retired from retiring.
I wasn't really there, I was there, not there. What happened then, again, if your listeners remember that period, this was at the end of the 90s. This was, the bubble,
the tech
internet bubble. And I was becoming increasingly unhappy with all the fluff, with all the froth, I should say, not fluff, the froth. I thought that even within the review, there was a tendency to push toward things that were dubious, in my opinion.
Faddish.
I'm very faddish. And so I just said, well, this isn't a job. I don't have to do it. Yeah. And I was motivated by that. I was I was a little angry, I guess, because I just thought it was a little bit of a betrayal of the audience, that managers, you didn't really need to get more pumped up over silliness. And so I wrote, it motivated me to write a book. I wrote a book called What Management Is, which is a book about general management. And it was a back to basics. What are the fundamentals?
But that's an interesting point, because you've been away from Bain a long time, and yet when it comes down to what you want to tell about the world, you go back to that Bain philosophy about what affects general managers, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because I really do think it is a very, very hard job and very much misunderstood, certainly by the general public, but even by people within organizations who, tend to, there's the Dilbert worldview.
Yeah. But what I find fascinating about this is that if you look at any time-honored technique, it doesn't fade over time because it's so fundamental. So here you've worked at Bain for a long time, rose to the level of partner. Within Bain, you've embraced this idea because it makes sense that the role of the general manager is where everything happens. You work at Harvard Business Review. When you leave, you don't change your mind. You just realize that, after working at the Harvard Business Review, I realized that it's still one of the most difficult things. I'm going to write a book about it. I mean, that's constancy of purpose.
Yeah, I guess. It was one of those things where I felt I had, at that point, something to say, particularly in the context of the day where everybody was going, it was all fast company and
disruption, nimble, agile.
Yeah, right. And so I felt I was also very grateful, actually, for what I had learned. And again, a little more context, because I came of age in the turbulent 1960s.
Yeah, Woodstock.
Yes, and at that point in history, if you were a young person and you were, you probably thought that business was just bad, and people who went into business were horrible people, and it was just poison.
Yes.
And my own experience then was really quite transformative. I thought, wow, these people, when I got to Bain, I thought, whew, these people are much smarter than the professors that I had worked with in my academic career. I thought they were more constructive, more positive, more, creating something of value, real tangible value, making an impact in people's lives. And so I just felt at the time that I was ready to leave the review that I just wanted to kind of think about what I had learned over the past years, and was very grateful for all that I had learned. So that was that book, and that was sort of cathartic to write it, I guess, in a way.
It's distilling your life's learnings, right?
Yeah.
It's always interesting when you write something that's a reflection of who you are, because what's important is not just what you say, but what you choose not to say.
Right.
That's the hardest part in writing a book, because it's like strategy. Strategy is not what you do; it's also what you don't do. And a book is very similar to that.
Very important, yes. Where are you going to say no?
Exactly. So you wrote the book, and then you came back out of retirement to work with Porter. How did the link happen?
Well, so what happened was, again, during the years that I was there, we really had a very productive working relationship. I spent a lot of time with him on his articles. There were a lot of wonderful conversations back and forth, and developing how to communicate these ideas and finding the best examples, etc. And so when I left the review, he basically proposed that we continue to work together. But again, it was very much on a
gig economy basis.
Yeah, very gig. I mean, I really was not looking to be.
You could go to Africa and edit. He was happy with it.
Right. So what I think of it now as much as just as sort of a continuing friendship and intellectual relationship. And, if he's writing something and wants an opinion, I'm always happy to weigh in, that kind of thing. And he's been it's been terrific working with him, but I wouldn't call it a job. I mean, I have been employed. So then he was asked to write a book. This is now the story of how Understanding Michael Porter got to be written.
Okay, good.
Which is the Harvard Business Review Press wanted him to write a short, kind of updated, pull together his core ideas about strategy book. So he was going to write that book, and he asked me if I would help him as his editor, and I said of course I would. But then the demands on his time are extraordinary, and time just kept passing, and we kept saying, oh yes, we'll start work in December, or we'll start work in March, or and it just never happened. So I was reporting back to the press to say, look, I'm sorry to tell you this, but I think the only way this book will happen is if I were to write it myself. And I was joking.
Yeah. They took it seriously. Don't make a joke.
They took it seriously and said, would you? And I said, well, I don't know. It's not my place to write this book. This is Michael Porter's book. But to my surprise, when approached, he thought it was a very good idea. So I was, of course, honored at the trust that demonstrated, and that's how that book got to be written. I wasn't, that wasn't something I was planning to do.
Yeah.
But that happened, and it's a book I'm actually quite proud of. I think his work is so extraordinary, and one of the things that's extraordinary about him is that he doesn't dial it in. He's actually thinking all the time, and pushing his thinking into new areas. Whether it's healthcare,
yes, that's right.
Whether it's today, it's politics, the political system. He's always refining his thinking. Now, if you're an editor, that can be very frustrating. You try to work on an article, and he's refining.
Yes.
And but if you're a serious editor, you appreciate that. That's why his work is so good. I mean,
also, strategy is not absolute. It's constantly evolving.
Yes.
I mean, if you're working with Michael Porter in January and you park something, by December, he's going to have, or you and him are probably going to have a new way of reflecting on the problem, framing it, thinking about it.
Yes.
I think that's a good sign.
Yeah. Well, and it was certainly true with his strategy work, because that was, of course, the early work, the 1980, 1985. Those were the books that made his reputation and really created the field that has since followed.
Yes.
But his thinking, those were early books, and some of it's amazing how much he got into them.
Yeah.
But some of the ideas, in particular, the generic strategies,
yes,
focus, differentiation, low cost producer, that was something where he kind of just threw that in at the end. He was finishing up the book, but it wasn't something that was as deeply developed as.
But that's what all people remember about the book.
As the core of the book.
Think about it.
And since then, his thinking on that has been refined, and so people are still stuck in those three generic strategies. But that's not where he is today.
He's moved on.
And so I was able to do that in understanding Michael Porter, to explain how he moved on and what the current iteration. It's not that he abandoned it; it's that he refined it. I think with Mike, it's always that he's going deeper, and that he understands it better, and that as he's seen it practice more and so forth. So anyway, that was understanding Michael Porter. And that was, by now it's like 10 years ago that it was published. But that was my real retirement then. I was done.
You called it quits, put an out of office response in email.
I called it quits. We went to Antarctica, which was the trip of a lifetime.
There's no email in Antarctica, so nobody could send you scripts to edit.
Exactly, nothing to be distracted by. So I don't know if you want to go on now to how the next thing happened.
Yes, very interesting. I love it.
Okay, so I got an email. I typically get a handful of emails every year of people who want me to write books with them. And I always say politely, thank you very much, but I'm not really interested in doing that kind of thing. I got an email from a guy, I call him a younger guy, but for me he's a young guy, in Germany. His name is Heinrich Zimmermann.
Yes.
And he wanted to produce an illustrated children's book about business. And my normal response would have been simply the same response as ever: no, thank you, I don't do those kind of things. But he was very clever. He actually produced not a whole book, but like a pamphlet with illustrations. And one of them had an illustration of Michael Porter that I thought was terrific. It was funny, very witty. It was clever. It was, and I thought, oh, that's pretty cool. However, I thought the idea of doing a book was crazy. Yes. But I was intrigued enough that I forwarded the message to Mike Porter, and with some kind of tagline like, this is a crazy idea. And I got back an email from him in about 3 minutes. I mean, it was like immediate. And he said, you've got to do this.
Wow.
So I thought,
some of the crazy ideas are the best ones, huh?
Yeah. So I thought, okay, well, so I was not interested in just writing another book, saying the same thing I'd said over again as a book. But I thought, wow, the illustrated book, that's kind of cool. I've never had anything to do with that. And who knows? So that's how the project got started.
So when did this project start? I mean, it sounds like a big job.
Well, it took a long time because it took almost a whole year for Harvard to get comfortable with the idea. And so, at first, we thought we were going to do a kid's book, but then as we developed the thinking about it, this is a stupid topic for kids. This is just not relevant. This is not like, Einstein for kids. Well, of course, everybody maybe wants to know something about Einstein, but Porter is not a household name for children.
Yes.
So
not yet, Joan, not yet.
Not yet, right, exactly. Well, it's true. If there's another book in 10 years, because I only do them every 10 years, it will be life lessons.
Yeah, exactly.
And I do think there are really some very good life lessons for kids and for everybody in this material. But I know Harvard's not going to publish that. So
not yet. In 10 years, we don't know who's the editor of Harvard Business Review.
Right. So it took them almost a year to decide, yes, that they would go ahead with it. I mean, that was a tough, they loved it. The people I showed it to, the editors loved it. But they, a picture book, we don't do picture books. This book was aiming to have a little bit of a sense of humor, which is also partly why I was wanting to write it, because I never get to write in my own voice,
Yes.
And so I kind of liked that idea but so it took them a while, but once they got on board, they really have been terrific. They were totally on board.
So from the time you received the email to getting Harvard on board to putting it together, it's like a 2-3 year process?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Wow,
Yeah.
So this is a little bit of a labor of love here. You've got to be patient,
Completely
coax people along.
Believe me, no one is making any minimum wage producing a book like this, So it was absolutely fun. It was a fun project.
But I have to ask the question: why did the guy who emailed you target the children's market? Did he explain why children versus adults?
I think what he thought. I mean, everyone has their passions here. So I think for Heinrich, he loves illustrated books.
Yeah.
I mean, he's kind of he's a business guy, but he has a real interest in design and graphic design. And he's a book lover. I mean, to get me to do this project, I can't tell you how many books he mailed me from Germany to hook me on the
illustrated books.
All illustrated books. Yeah.
Well, that's quite interesting. So really, it's just he had the passion. You could conceive the idea. You had to convince. There's a lot of moving pieces. Yeah.
A lot of moving pieces, right? I had to kind of shape the book and its content, and Heinrich then literally searched the world to find the absolute right illustrator for this project. And he found, I don't know.
Yeah, the illustrations are very good.
But I think they're just incredible. And so that was Emil Homewood, who is a fantastic illustrator with a willingness to really understand the content.
That's very rare, I must say.
He really got into it. And that was a problem we had earlier, because most illustrators, they wanted, I'll do my one page for it. And it's very transactional.
Yeah, and tell me what you want. You get 2 changes and that's it.
Right, exactly. So basically for the last year of this effort, I mean, Emil and I were, and he is a New Zealander, an early career in London and now based in Tokyo.
Wow.
So
drawing
Emil
definitely pays well then.
Emil and I spent a lot of 12-hour time to 13-hour time difference calls, batting ideas back and forth about the illustrations. So I think he did a superb job. I really hope that this helps people as a kind of entry point into strategy, that it's very inviting, I think.
Yes. I mean, I can tell you my take on this because I read it this morning before the call. I like to read a book before I speak to the person so the thoughts are fresh with me. Because I was thinking about why you would do this. Not in a negative sense. I think in any book, you can always learn something. So I'm trying to think, why would Joan do this?
Yeah.
And then I said, let's put the book aside because we both have a business background, we tend to be emotional about the subject. So I said, what would happen if a world-famous surgeon decided to write a book like this about surgery?
Yeah.
Why would he do it? What would be the value? So I read the book and I was expecting this to be not useful to me because, I mean, some people may disagree, but I have a strategy background. But I thought the book was very useful, and I'll tell you why. Because a lot of books, there's so much detail that you can't see the big picture. I thought the book was a lot like a map for me. It told me where to go, but so for example, if I'm going to Paris, it maps out the route, but I didn't need to do some research to find out how much currency I must take, what to pack, and so on. But there is value in having a map. There's a lot of value in it. So I think that, where you said it's kind of a staging point, yes, I think that for people who don't know strategy, there's enough here to show them that it's interesting, it's exciting, and I think that's a big part of the book because strategy can be very boring. And they can then decide, I want to know more about this. But I was surprised that as someone who knows strategy well, it was actually very useful Because sometimes you forget or you don't emphasize the same things other strategy practitioners emphasize. Because you worked at Bain, you were a Bain partner, but if you took two Bain partners, put them to work for the same company, they'd come up with different strategies. Right?
Yeah.
Because they emphasize different things. So I found it very interesting. I thought it was very humorous, which I liked. I think whoever decided to do that, and maybe you did that, I thought it was very clever. I was very impressed with the fact that, the cover, for example, is a matte finish, which is very rare when you look at books today. Most books have that glossy finish, which I'm not a big fan of, personally. I like a matte finish because it's easy on the eye. It doesn't reflect. So from a just aesthetic perspective, it works well. But the content I felt was very well written. I mean, and that shows, I don't know if you know Marvin Bower, who used to run McKinsey.
Oh, yeah.
But he was a big believer in the ability to communicate what you're saying. And I think that today a lot of people have M.B.A. backgrounds, but they don't necessarily know how to write. Forgotten art.
Yes.
And I thought the book was extremely well written to hit on all of the points that are necessary, because I don't think many people know what Michael Porter is saying in the world.
Yeah.
I think he's probably the least understood business thinker. What's happened is over time, because there's been no official translator of Michael Porter, there's a whole cottage industry of people translating him. And there's no standardized way of saying, is this the right interpretation of Porter? And I've sat in meetings with, fairly famous CEOs who will be talking to me about Michael Porter, but what they're saying is absolutely incorrect.
Yes.
And that's very common. I'm sure you've seen that as well. So one of the things I've seen in your career, and we were talking about this book, but it's very obvious to me you're an educator first and foremost. You like to teach.
Yes.
I think that is really, if you look at your whole background, how you do things, that comes across. And then I was looking at this book, and it's clear to me that, a lot of times you can have a very good idea, but if the world doesn't understand it, how can you have an impact? And Michael Porter's writing is very difficult to get through. I mean, I read his first book. You need to have a lot of brandy and coffee with you to work your way through that. So I like the book. I think it will have an impact, Joan.
Well, thank you.
I don't say that about many books.
That's great.
In fact, if I have nothing good to say, I wouldn't give you a review of the book. I can tell you that right now. But it's good for people who know strategy and people who don't know strategy. And one of the things I think you must not discount is that if you give this to a young person who's sort of 16 and 17, and if you get them excited about business, I think maybe we can have the right kind of people doing MBAs.
Yes.
Because a lot of people who do MBAs do it for money. They don't do it because they have the desire to change the world.
Yes.
And I was thinking about this book. Yeah, well, maybe if a 16-year-old saw this and said, you know what, business can be really interesting and exciting, maybe we'll start broadening the pool of people going into business. Because as you say in the book, everyone's obsessed with shareholder value. Because it's like a football game, right? Every day you can see the score going up or down. Nobody really measures return on invested capital because it's not that exciting. You can't really, it's not exciting. But so I liked many things about the book. The way I see it is more like a starting point in a new way for you to continue teaching. Maybe you'll never do an illustrated book again, but it's a continuation of that theme.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
I enjoyed it. So let's just talk about strategy and Michael Porter, right? I don't think many people understand Michael Porter. That's my personal view. It's not because he's not been good at communicating. I just think we've fallen into a cycle whereby people like short, condensed answers, even though creating a strategy for $100 billion business is not something that's easy to do. So what is if you had to, let me rephrase this question correctly, what would be your advice for someone thinking about strategy, developing strategy? How should they go about this? Because there's so much to get lost in. It's very hard to, one of the things I always tell people is that if I look at the strategy for a company that absolutely failed because it was a bad strategy, and if I looked at a company that succeeded because it was a good strategy, unless I know what to look for, it's hard to distinguish both. And many people don't know what to look for. They're used to seeing things like frameworks, hypotheses,
Right.
Because that's become the de facto language of strategy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, if there's one thing we could impart on people, how do I know this is right? How am I thinking about this?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, it is why I think you have to start with Porter.
Yeah.
And because what you find in the kind of world of business articles and books and so forth are whatever fads happen to be
the
current.
Latest, the shiniest.
Yeah. And it's not that all of them are silly or wrong-headed or whatever. They usually, the ones that make sense are there because something in the current environment is relevant. And so the fad is there. I shouldn't use the word fad. The theme.
Mm-hmm. The newest idea.
To be non-judgmental about it, the theme actually meets a very current problem, but it doesn't address the enduring fundamental bedrock principles that really underpin success. And that's what Porter's work has done. It's tackled those kind of fundamentals. I mean, I think of it as like the basic laws of physics for business or for actually for organizations, because I do believe, and he does as well, that these apply to nonprofits as well as
that's true.
Profit-making companies. So, and Porter is actually, it's funny because people find him so difficult, and yes, his first of all, the two books that lay out the heavyweight of the theory, they're older books, and it is like I told you my first career I taught undergraduates literature and film, and in particular with film, it was always frustrating to me. Like, you could show them incredible film like a Citizen Kane, but it's black and white, and they would say, "Ooh, we have to watch a black."
Yes, context, right?
We need color, flash. So, but what Porter's ideas actually don't seem that complicated to me.
To me too. They seem intuitive.
It's really, so if you could get people to focus on the core, which is, if you want to be successful, what is success? Well, success means better performance than other people in your industry. Okay, well, what is better performance? It's more profitable relative to the investment you put into making those profits. Well, what is profit? Well, price minus cost. Now, how complicated is that, right?
Not very.
Price minus cost. Okay, well, what drives price and what drives cost? And
so it's just fundamentals, right?
Logical tree that it does not, I think Porter does, his ideas really focus you on the essential, the fundamental, the bedrock economics, the underlying economics of running an organization.
Yes.
And what I hoped with this, the illustrated book, What is Strategy, to kind of lay out the very, very basics. I mean, this is the high points. They might be something like, a gateway drug to draw people in. I
love that analogy.
This is cool.
Yeah.
I want to learn more. And that's why the final image in the book is, there's more to learn. I would hope that people would go, and it's not, I'm really not just flogging my own work here.
Sure.
But if you go to Porter's website, he's got my book on his website.
You are the official translator of Michael Porter.
I think so. I think it's
certified by the Queen of England.
But I do think it will take you the next level from what strategy, because what you can't do in a short illustrated book is you can't give extended illustrations where you can say, look at what this company, here's how this works. Let me illustrate this. And I think to go deeper, you probably want that. But I do think if you get these basics right, you then can ask just intelligent questions like, you're saying we should make this acquisition. How is that going to affect our business prices, cost? What's it going to do? What effect will that have on our value chain here? Is this an unrelated diversification? Is this core to our business? And how is it going to impact our business? So I don't think it's too much to ask of people who are running billion-dollar businesses.
Yeah.
Learn the basics And if if you don't have that attention span or interest in it, I'm not sure why you're there.
No, I agree with you. I was thinking about this very carefully. And so you've taken Michael Porter's thinking and you've made it not relevant. That's the wrong word. I like the example he gave with Citizen Kane. If you remove all of the distractions, you can allow people to appreciate the substance. That's what you've done. You've repackaged it in a language and a aesthetic that is not going to be distracting to people that read now, because they like to read in a certain way, right? That's good. You've also mentioned it's a gateway. I like that analogy. I think that is actually true, but not necessarily in a negative sense, because I do think the book is very useful just the way it is, especially if you do have a strategy background and you've been to an M.B.A. program. I don't think you need more than this book.
Oh,
actually.
yes, I agree for that audience. Absolutely.
Yeah, for that audience, this is really a map, and they have all of the tools to get there.
Yes.
But, I mean, a bigger thing that this raised for me, and it's not about Porter, it's just a general observation, is that if you think of very successful businessmen and women, like Steve Jobs, it's almost a pity that Steve Jobs didn't have someone like you to translate his thinking, because I don't think people understand the way he thought.
Yeah.
And in some ways, he was a genius, but we'll never understand what was where's that microeconomic decision criteria he used when thinking about design? I mean, what was the approach he took? And that's lost forever, right?
Yeah.
And the point I'm trying to make is that there almost is a case to be made that for any good thinker, they're only as good as the person who can translate what they're saying and put it out there.
It's an interesting observation.
Because it's like any good writer needs a very good editor to shape the voice.
Yes. Yes.
And you have a bad editor, as you know, you could end up destroying the book. Yes. On the other hand, if you have a very good editor, they actually make the book much more than it could have been. Yes. So you're not really an editor of Michael Porter. Well, you were when you were at Harvard Business Review, but then you became a translator for Michael Porter. Yeah. And I think that's a very valuable role. But it's almost as if we tend to forget that the principles of how to run good business has not really changed, right?
Right.
They haven't changed. I mean, from 1960 to 1970, it's always been the same thing. The context, agreed, has changed. The mechanism by which we deliver value has changed. There's now the internet and so on. But as you say in the book, the internet is not really disruptive, right? It's just about learning how to use this new channel.
Yes.
And I like that, because we use the word disruptive so often, it's lost all sense of purpose.
Yes, it's meaningless now.
Strategy is meaningless. Disruption is meaningless.
Right.
To the point whereby when we talk about strategy and it has so many interpretations, you don't even know if you're going in the right direction. Yeah.
No, that's absolutely right.
So from here, is your plan to do more work with Michael Porter, work about Michael Porter, or is there some other writer you want to distill for the world, or your own work, for example?
I don't know.
We have to wait 10 years, is what you say.
I have to wait and see. I have to say, the work that I would have done had I not gone down the Porter trail was I was always kind of interested in business models from the earliest days of before people were really talking about them too much and writing about them too much. And I wrote an early piece for the Harvard Business Review, and I could have followed up with that. And it's so there's probably a book in the back of my head that about business models, but I don't know if I'll ever write it.
Well, that's a topic again that's vastly misunderstood. And a very hot word I see, phrase, not word, that I see thrown around today is business model innovation.
Right. No,
As if there's some business model that's not innovative versus another one that's innovative. To me, any business model that generates return on invested capital sustainably is an innovative business model.
Right.
but I think that what's fascinating is that you've got many angles to play with, because you've got almost a new way of presenting business with this book. You've got new topics. Michael Porter isn't going anywhere soon, so you don't know what idea he's going to have for you to work with. Joan, I really enjoyed speaking to you. This was such a fascinating conversation.
Same here. I hope I'm grateful for the chance to do this. Thank you.
No, I enjoyed it immensely. I mean, you've got such an interesting career, but yet you spend more time talking about other people and writing about other people, which is very interesting for me.
I wanted to make this observation about you, and you said about that great thinkers need help.
Yeah.
People willing to and the thing one of the things that bothers me about the business field is that everybody's more concerned with establishing their own brand than they are with solving the problems of the poor managers who are struggling with the hard jobs that they have, and I find that irritates me, that it's like, and so you don't find as many people happy to be teaching.
Yes.
And this was even true with Peter Drucker, which stunned me, because I think now that there was a man who was not only a brilliant
but he could teach, right?
But he was a wonderful writer.
Yeah.
So
that's a rare gift.
That's a very, very rare gift. But then if you followed academic, what was going on in the academy, there weren't very many people wanting to teach Drucker.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, wow, because I think for me, Drucker and Porter are the kind of the
pillars, yes.
The pillars, this is, Drucker will teach you the humanitarian side of business, the people side, the complex intertwining of economic forces and psychological forces and sociological forces. I mean, he is like a liberal arts education.
Yes.
And about the humanity of business, really. And Porter is the kind of the fundamental economics of organizations in competitive situations. You put the two together and you've got, but there aren't most people in the field then don't want to teach other people's work.
Yes, they want to build their own brand.
They want to build their own brand. And I think that's a shame. I mean, I think there's something lost there.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I was speaking to Ram Charan and Gary Hamel. Yeah. And they were regaling me with these stories about how Asian general managers and CEOs are obsessed with understanding the fundamentals of how American businesses work.
Uh-huh.
And I can't remember who was telling me the story, but someone pulled out a book from 1980 when he was in China and wanting him to explain a paragraph that Michael Porter wrote. Huh. I mean, that's an amazing story, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely.
But I think what we always forget, because we have a very American-centric view of the world, is that the rest of the world still wants good teachers.
Yes. Interesting.
And if you go to China, you go to Vietnam, or you go to anywhere, they don't worry who's the brand. They want to know if it works and show me how it works.
Yes.
And I'll figure it out.
Yes.
It's just in the United States, we've reached a model whereby, as you mentioned, with 10 years and not enough jobs in universities, professors now want to be their own brand to protect their jobs.
Yes.
That's an outcome.
Yeah. No, it's true. It's true. So it's just that's an interesting observation.
But I think there's definitely value for teaching and getting the message across.
Yeah.
And what's fascinating to me about this is that this is not something you can measure in 1 year. This is something you measure over 15, 20 years. If you want to know if the book is influential in 20 years, you've got to ask the question. Survey people and say, did you read the book? How did it help you?
Yeah.
And how did those companies perform by using this? It's not something you can measure, but I think you can never go wrong. If you look at nations that always succeed, they invest in education.
Yes.
And teaching is education. I mean, globally, that's the standard. You invest in education, you will succeed. So I must thank you for this.
Well, thank you, Michael. This has really been a pleasure.
We'll wrap up here, but we'll be in touch and let you know what's happening. But hopefully we'll speak again soon because I really enjoyed this.
Okay, well, thank you. You've
Take
been
care.
a wonderful partner here. Thank you. Bye.
And that's it for today's episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed doing the episode. Finally, I want you to remember that the only way to get access to our special offers, the only way to get our special pricing, and the only way to get samples of our content is to join the list on firmsconsulting.com. It's the only way also to get access to our unique advanced content that we make available to insiders. So if you want to get a sneak peek of things, test it out, see what's in there, this is the place to go. And finally, I want to thank you again for making us one of the largest podcast channels around the world for careers and for the 2 million downloads and counting.